quick comment, observation, and we'll throw it back to you guys. I'll start with you, Meredith. So, having watched the film before, but on my computer during the sort of the evaluation process, and seeing it again on the big screen, I have to say it's just so deeply moving, and it takes place in a very compressed period of time, and also it struck me as being intensely personal and specific to this young girl going through this, but also quite universal, which is, it could be so many young women. I'd like to know the origin story behind the making of the film, how sort of you came to the decision to express this, and then sort of what the impact has been where you've shown it elsewhere, because I think our audience was quite moved by it.
Yeah, well, thank you for watching it and being here. This was actually like a deeply personal film, because that actually happened to me where someone pantsed me when I was 12 and I had just got my period, and I was like, this is something that I don't think people even talk about, of even between women don't really talk about getting their periods for the first time, but it's very traumatic to be a child turning into an adult and not being able to share that with anybody. But I wanted to make it a very specific, very universal story that was actually like a quite specific moment in time for me that felt very isolating and very alone, but to sort of broaden it. So that's why I set it in a gym where we're all used to kind of running around a blank gym like that and feeling so alone.
With a male gym teacher.
With a male gym teacher, and feeling like I can't even tell this person who's supposed to be protecting me or keeping me safe in some capacity. So that's why I also wanted to make it a very quiet film, because I wanted it to feel very internal, and the things that she was going through in her mind and in her body that were not necessarily said out loud.
Yeah, well, I think you achieved that very, very well, because there was just a very spare amount of dialogue, and a lot, she's in every single scene. And so I think we just talked a little bit yesterday about the young woman who played this role. Describe how you found her, and she seemed fantastic in doing this. But did it have an impact on her playing this role?
Oh, I was very specific, and because it was a version of myself, I wanted to make sure that the actor was actually Asian or half Asian, and she actually ended up being half Filipino. And we just sort of cast generally for, my producer helped me find her through a casting website, and she's 15, I think now 16, but she was supposed to be playing 12, and we kind of talked about kind of going back a couple years in her mind to what that was like for her. And she just really got it, and I think being half Asian or half anything or part anything and feeling other in some way really leads you into this other sort of isolating viewpoint in your mind of being like, I can't even express this thing that actually happens to everybody because I feel so alone in all these other ways. So we talked a little bit about that. We talked about my experience, but she really just got it. And for me to have to direct her and saying, you're not going to have a lot of words to say things, so I really need it to show on your face. And she is just so extraordinary, and really, I barely had to, after a few rehearsals, we barely had to talk about it, and I just really gave her space to perform and do what she really does. She's so talented.
Mm-hmm. It was very fortunate for you. All right, so Jo, okay, this is the second time I've watched this film, and Lisa, thank you for bringing this all together. It's overwhelmingly powerful. Toward the end, I think, well, there's maybe, I wouldn't call it a happy ending, but there's an optimism. But then again, there's not. Because the film goes back a long way. You have footage from 2014, I think. So, and here we are today in one of the most fraught times we could possibly imagine. So I'd like to know the arc here. From when you started, why you started this, and then if you could just fill us in on how you feel the trajectory of the film is sort of overlaying where we are now in the wake of Rose Overton. It's a very broad question, and please unpack it at your leisure if you want.
And if I wander, redirect.
Okay.
I just wanted to say first, though, the stick of gum element in your film was so poignant and so perfect, and I just so appreciated that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, so I actually was sitting under my covers watching a Rachel Maddow segment in 2011, and there was a fetal personhood amendment in Mississippi up for a vote. And I'd never heard of such an animal. I was like, what is this? And my brain just got going as to the implications, that this really wasn't about abortion anymore, and just how broad-reaching, the consequences were. And so I thought, this is a good angle. I've never heard anyone do anything on fetal personhood. There are many excellent abortion films. But as I was doing my research, I started seeing the impacts about this criminalization of pregnant people element. And that's what I really wanted to go down that rabbit hole, because I thought I would need to look to another country that was very restrictive, that was already putting women in jail for miscarriages, suspicious miscarriages. And I started coming across articles about women in this country that was happening to. And I was really stunned. And I considered myself informed. I got a lot of pushback in the beginning from people who were active in pro-choice, and they said this is a fringe movement. Don't worry about fetal personhood. It was defeated in Mississippi. It's going nowhere. And we find ourselves 2 days ago with a front page article in the New York Times about fetal personhood. And even though it has been this slow burn, this has been the strategy. And now it has become the predominant strategy of the anti-choice movement. And I just connected with advocates, which is such an important thing to do as a filmmaker, because you come in, I have a background in activism, but you don't come in as an expert. You come in as a storyteller and a filmmaker. And so to connect with advocates who are on the ground every day working with these people, I got such an education, and I think it really helped tell a fuller picture of the story. And so through that process, I met national advocates for pregnant women who, they're based out of New York. They do amazing work, and they connected me to Tammy, who was just fresh out of her jail experience. And she really grilled me as to my intentions, and we connected. And she just, from that moment on, just laid bare everything. She was so courageous. She was nursing in between our interview takes. That's how early in the process this was. And this is an independent film, and we would raise a little bit of money. I'd go edit someone else's project, and we'd raise a little bit more money. And so the beauty of that, though, is that the film evolved over these many years, and we got to see a long-term picture of Tammy. And I have experienced this extremely traumatized woman who was kind of a wreck at every time we had to reestablish our trust and all of that, because her trust in institutions and people was so destroyed. But now I've just seen her just blossom into this amazing, much more confident person. She feels some redemption, and that's been the most gratifying part of all of this.
You were able to establish trust pretty quickly. Did you think that was unusual, or you just came to her at the right time, and that you're an empathetic person and it just happened? Because that could have taken a long time.
Yes, and it is very unusual, and I will credit Tammy for that. I mean, she knew that I was a genuine person and that I really cared about this, and I'm pretty easygoing, so we connected right away. But I approached many women in the course of doing this film. I wanted to tell a couple of different stories, and no one was really able, for many reasons. Some people are just too traumatized. Some people were still in jail. Some people had active legal cases, so they couldn't. But Tammy she was so determined this wouldn't happen to another woman. And unfortunately, thousands of women in Wisconsin have been ensnared in this law. It's still, you can look it up, and they have an index of their child abuse report, and there's an appendix that talks about unborn child abuse, and they publish it every year. You can see it's still being applied, and of those thousands, they don't all turn out like what happened to Tammy, many are dropped. Many are, it kind of weeds them out. Some go to jail, some are mandated in treatment, some get their children taken away. But we really don't know because it is a secret court and it doesn't make sense. None of these things make sense.
So women are still living under this sort of, I don't know, dangling axe in a way that is going on in Wisconsin, where this could still befall them. They could still be challenged in all these ways. Jail isn't necessarily the what happens to all of them, as you're pointing out, but they could certainly be questioned, and I don't know. I find it's just kind of shocking, the whole thing. I was not really aware. I mean, watching your movie, you actually make a very good point. A lot of what's going down has to do with the aftermath of Roe v. Wade, all about abortion politics. But this preceded it. So a lot didn't preceded it, but it's been a separate track, now merging, as you're saying. What comes out of this film? Is there going to be sort of a campaign that you would take it elsewhere, educational campaign, social impact? Where do you go from here? Because it's really powerful.
Well, our film was a little interrupted by the pandemic,
Sure.
and so during, when we were out with the film, there was a group, Repro Action, in Wisconsin, and they actually have campaigns around the country, but they had a Fight 292, Stop 292, and they did, we showed the film several times, but they ended the campaign because the law was not coming off the books. And the interesting thing about these laws is you can see with the states, so this week, several states will have trigger laws, which are the laws that would create an abortion ban in the wake of Roe being overturned. That's going into effect. So what you have is this very patchwork, piecemeal set of laws across the country, and even within a state like Wisconsin, it really depended on what county you lived in, who your DA was, who that prosecutor was. Some people, let's say in Madison, they're not so interested in applying this, but you get out in the rural counties, then you're really the victim of the moral view of who has been elected. And so this is why it seems a little quaint now to see the word vote at the end, because it just seems like the obstacles are so high, but it really, really matters who your local judges are. You need to really think carefully, because it's because of those people that these laws are able to exist. And I found out something later, this doctor who totally divulged Tammy's information, this is one of the most insidious things, is that she had no idea that, and I found this out after the film came out, she had no idea that she was going to be giving information that was result in this pregnant person being put into jail, the most unsafe place she could be. And physicians and doctors don't understand that they're not obligated to report. But now in Texas, there was a decision today because the administration had put out guidance for doctors saying you must take action to help a woman who is in danger of losing her life. And the Texas court overturned that. So in fact, it's guidance. Doctors are in a very confusing place. They don't know what they're supposed to do. So you need states like Vermont. I hear you guys are going to have an amendment to protect a person's right to abortion here. So you need to do it that way.
Yeah. Let's go to the audience. Who has questions? Yes, go ahead. And you have to speak up because we don't have a way to get
no
you
problem. I can speak loud.
I can hear you.
So thank you both very much. So first I wanted to go to the girl, right? So I wanted to say thank you for also bringing queer experience into this moment of, as a queer woman, what is that like in the way you use the camera, right? To look at like the back of a neck, or the way a bracelet hits, right? Because this is where her eyes were going. And this is why that gun was so important, right? And there was trust being built here. But thank you for bringing that nuance into it. And can you speak a little bit to like why that was so important for you? And then I do have a question for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for even noticing it, because I didn't want to make it super blatant, but I think people who have this experience of longing for something, for looking at in these tiny moments. That was so important. The subtlety of that was so important to me. So yeah, in addition to her being of color, I was trying to infuse this sense of I'm also isolated because I'm not looking at the boys that way. I'm looking at the other girls that way, and am I looking at them because I want to be them, or am I looking at them because there's something more there? And really having this sort of, I think, you know, you can, depending on what your perspective is, as your own experience, you know, you watch the film differently. And that's also why I named it The Girl. I wanted it to be, which girl are we talking about? Are we talking about the main girl? Are we talking about the girl that she longs for? Are we talking about the girl who actually is noticing the lead? And so I wanted to create a lot of these like sort of nuanced dynamics with that. I also made sure that my entire crew was all female and non-binary. So because there was a shorthand that I had with a lot of them saying, I interviewed every single person that worked on the film and said, we're gonna be, you know, showing a very intimate thing. And every single one of them told me the stories of getting their period for the first time. And even with our hair and makeup person, I sat down and I was like, I want this to look really real. I don't want you to just put a bunch of red stuff on this pad. I want it to look, and we talked about what type of makeup she would use to make the blood look like real period blood. And like first time period blood, which for people who have never gotten their period, it's a different color, it's a different texture, it's all those things, and I wanted to make sure that that was communicated through what it looked like on screen. But you know, when you work with women and non-binary folks who have been through an experience like that, you didn't even have to like really, they just got it, and there was a comfortability there and an ease with working with them, and I was so proud of everyone that worked on it because they really, I mean, I'm a first-time director and they really entrusted me to lead, but I really said, you know, you do what you guys do best, and let me know how I can empower you. And so we had a very queer crew, and it was just, yeah, it was the most magical experience I could ask for creating my first piece of work this way. But thank you for noticing that. That was, yeah, it was obviously a very personal film, but it was really important to me to get some of these themes out, and even if they weren't explicit. So, thanks.
Well, good job.
Thanks.
Can I do a follow-up? I'm actually, like I said, I'm a queer, indigenous, and also woman out of diaspora, so Afro-Latinx, person who was born in Wisconsin. So your film hit hard. But specifically, I think my question here is this, you know, for daughters of the diaspora, for indigenous women, control of our bodies is innate in this country. It is built on it, like our control of our bodies is what built the fabric of this country. So my question for you is, like, I thought it was amazing that you chose this particular woman to build a narrative around. And so important because oftentimes, even though we are the ones affected the most, statistically, it is imperative that white women see themselves in this issue. And so can you talk to maybe us about how important it was to like put her at the center, and for that helping conversations for other women who may not see themselves in this issue to be brought into it?
That's such a great question. Thank you. It was really hard. Well, there were a lot of hard conversations to have in making this film because this is an issue that predominantly affects and impacts people of color. And it also predominantly impacts lower income people. And that's where Tammy fits in. She is part of this demographic. And it was so important then to have Sharice Scott, the most amazing advocate from Tennessee, be able to speak directly to these issues so that, you know, we were able to tell a fuller picture. I really did want to have a story of a woman of color in the film, and it just was too big of an ask for the people who were in jail. The slightest pushback I got, I just said, I so understand. It is such a hard thing to lay bare everything. And so it was almost, you know, I didn't have a lot of people to choose from, and Tammy just landed because she's so relatable and she experiences something that so many people experience in poverty. And once you're in the system, that's the problem, because you become on the radar. And so this is something that I think people don't understand is why don't you go seek help? Well, she did seek help, and it comes up as a flag again and again and again. So you're put in this very hard spot, rock in a hard place. You want to go get the help, but then you're under the surveillance of the state. And so I just love your question, because it was a really interesting thing, especially in the world of reproductive justice, because you really want to be representative. And as a white filmmaker, I was really conscious of that, and sometimes self-conscious of that I didn't have a broader experience, represented. But that's what I hope, that Charisse is so powerful, that I hope that Charisse really was able to get her message out. And it was also important to talk about the foundation of reproductive justice as coming out of the Black community and this group of women in Chicago who sat down and set up the pillars of reproductive justice. I hope that answers.
I'd like to do more, if it's short, Stacy, because I got to get you folks out of here.
One thing, I thought both films were wonderful. The one thing I wanted to ask you is, what I found sort of interesting is that I think it was the father who dropped the drugstore, but no mother involved in this.
Mm-hmm.
Usually when it comes to something like that, your mother is there. The other question I have for you is, where can people see this film?
Go ahead, Meredith.
Great question. I wanted her to have this sense of not having anywhere to go.
It was like isolate.
Yeah, and that there was, and I actually, it's not really that clear, but you don't see any of the adults' faces really. There's one shot that you see an adult's face, and that shot I needed for other reasons. So, but my intention was to not have any adults showing their face at all, because I wanted her to feel, there was just no one that she felt comfortable with, no one that she felt safe with, and so that's why there was.
You can see the film, you can rent it from Amazon, or it's if you look up on your Roku, it'll give you all the various places, Apple TV or Fandango. But with Lisa's help, I've started to have some more screenings, because we were interrupted from our screening in 2020, and so now it was interesting. This is my first time seeing it since Dobbs and the overturn of Roe, and I was very emotional.
Yeah.
And it hit differently.
Yeah.
And at first I thought, oh, the film, came out in the end of 2019, maybe it doesn't feel now in light of Dobbs, and Lisa mentioned to me at the end, no, it does play, because that fight is just not going to be over. And the hope that I have is that these folks are really going to overstep their bounds with fetal personhood. People will start to die. Unfortunately, we'll have our own cases where women, we've seen this in other countries where women die. And so that's unfortunately going to happen. And I do think as opposed to having a federal personhood amendment, my hope is that we'll have a federal amendment protecting abortion, and it may be at 15 weeks or something that is a compromise. But I do think they'll overplay their hand.
The one thing that you said, which is so important, is the local elections that really count.
Yes, it matters more than anything.
Yeah.
Okay, I hate to end it, but I have to go, and I think there's an 11:30 screening coming here. So thank you both. Please give these folks a
Thank you, everyone.
tremendous round of applause for their great work.